Did you know that a repeating pattern has led to the collapse of 5 global reserve currencies over the last 575 years? What if the US dollar is next? It's not just some wild theory. History shows us that every dominant currency eventually falls, and the signs are already here. The Spanish real, the Dutch guilder, the British pound, they all followed the same path: overconfidence, debt, and then decline. Now, the dollar's been on top for decades, but cracks are forming. Inflation's rising, debts are piling up, and other countries are quietly moving away from it. If the pattern holds, we could be standing on the edge of another historic shift. The question isn't if it'll happen, but when, and whether we're ready for what comes next. The collapse of reserve currencies isn't random. It follows a precise 8-stage pattern that's repeated throughout history. First, the currency becomes the world's dominant reserve asset, backed by trust and economic strength. Then, the issuing country starts running persistent trade deficits, flooding the world with its currency to pay for imports. Next, the central bank keeps interest rates artificially low to support growth. But this leads to excessive debt and financial imbalances. By stage 4, the currency's value begins to weaken as confidence wavers, and other nations start diversifying away from it. Stage 5 is where things get critical. The government tries to prop up the currency with interventions, but these only delay the inevitable. Then comes stage 6. Inflation spikes as the currency loses purchasing power, and people rush to protect their wealth and hard assets. Stage 7 is the breaking point. Capital flight accelerates as investors lose faith, and the currency's reserve status crumbles. Finally, in stage 8, the system resets. A new reserve currency emerges, and the cycle begins again. It's a pattern as predictable as it is destructive, and history shows it's nearly impossible to escape once it starts. Money has always been a tool of power, and those who control it shape the world. Stage 1 is where a currency doesn't just exist, it dominates. Think of the Spanish silver dollar in the 16th century, minted from the vast riches of the New World. It didn't just fund empires, it became the backbone of global trade, from the markets of China to the ports of Europe. Spain's military might ensure its currency was trusted, and soon, no major transaction could happen without it. Or, take the British pound in the 19th century. The Royal Navy ruled the waves, and British banks financed the Industrial Revolution. The pound wasn't just strong, it was the standard. Nations pegged their own money to it because Britain's economic and military dominance made resistance futile. If you wanted to trade, you played by their rules. This is how it works. First, economic strength makes a currency indispensable. Then, military power enforces its supremacy. The currency isn't just accepted, it's demanded. And once that happens, the world bends to its will. The British Empire stretched its arms too far, too thin. By the early 20th century, it was holding on to colonies from India to Africa, pouring resources into maintaining control while its economy strained under the weight. The Suez Crisis in 1956 was the breaking point. Britain tried to flex its old muscle, only to be humiliated when the US and USSR called its bluff. The empire had to retreat, its coffers empty, and its pride wounded. Then there was the Soviet Union, locked in a Cold War arms race it couldn't win. By the 1980s, it was propping up client states from Cuba to Afghanistan, draining its economy to keep up with American military spending. The invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 was the final misstep, a costly, unwinnable war that bled them dry. The system collapsed under its own weight, leaving a superpower in ruins. Even the US isn't immune. After the Cold War, it became the world's policeman, stationing troops everywhere, fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that dragged on for decades. The price tag? Trillions of dollars, a fractured public and a military stretched to its limits. History has a way of repeating itself. Empires rise, they overextend, and then they fall. You know how when you keep spending more than you make, things start to fall apart? That's stage 3, permanent deficit spending. It's not just a bad year or two, it's a pattern where expenses always outpace revenue, and there's no real plan to fix it. Governments keep borrowing, printing money, or slashing services just to keep the lights on. Look at the Roman Empire. By the 3rd century, they were spending way more on their military and bureaucracy than they were bringing in through taxes. They debased their currency, cutting the silver in coins to stretch their budget, but that just made inflation worse. Prices skyrocketed, trust in money collapsed, and the economy crumbled under the weight of it all. Or take Venezuela in the 2010s. Oil prices dropped, but their spending didn't. They kept up massive social programs and subsidies, running deficits year after year. The government printed money to cover the gap, and hyperinflation hit. Prices doubling every few weeks. People's savings vanished, businesses shut down, and the country spiraled into crisis. That's the thing about stage 3. It's not just about the numbers. It's about what happens when the system can't sustain itself anymore. The math doesn't lie. If you keep spending more than you earn, eventually something's got to give. The presses never stopped. Day and night, they churned out stacks of paper money, each bill fresh off the rollers, crisp and promising. Governments thought they'd found the answer. Just print more, cover the gaps, keep the wheels turning. But the more they printed, the less each bill was worth. The numbers on the paper stayed the same, but the value didn't. People lined up at banks, clutching their savings, only to find their money bought half what it did the month before. Prices climbed like a runaway train and wages couldn't keep up. The shelves emptied, not because there was no food, but because no one could afford it. The money was there, but it meant nothing. History had seen this before. Germany in the 1920s, wheelbarrows of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. Zimbabwe in the 2000s, where a $1 trillion note couldn't fill a gas tank. The pattern was always the same: print, spend, collapse. The machines kept running, but the trust in the system didn't. And once that was gone, no amount of ink and paper could bring it back. So let's talk about what happens when inflation really starts to bite. You know that feeling when you go to the grocery store and suddenly your cart feels lighter but your bill is heavier? That's inflation eroding your purchasing power. Take something simple, like a loaf of bread. Back in 2020, you could grab one for maybe $2.50. Fast forward a couple of years, now you're paying 4 or more for the same loaf. It's not like the bread got better, it's just that your dollar doesn't stretch as far. And it's not just groceries. Think about gas. Remember when filling up your tank didn't feel like a mini financial crisis? A few years ago, you might have paid $2.50 a gallon. Now, you're looking at $4 or even $5 in some places. And that's real money out of your pocket every single week. For someone driving to work every day, that's an extra $100 a month just to keep the car running. Then there's rent. If you're lucky enough to have a fixed-rate mortgage, you're sitting pretty. But if you're renting, good luck. Landlords aren't just raising rents because they feel like it. They're raising them because their costs are going up too. So now you're paying $1,500 for an apartment that used to be $1,200, and suddenly that extra $300 a month means you're cutting back on everything else. It all adds up. You skip the morning coffee run. You put off that dentist appointment. You start buying the store brand instead of the name brand. And before you know it, you're working just as hard, but your money isn't going as far. That's inflation. It's not just numbers on a screen. It's the slow squeeze on your wallet, making life just a little bit harder every single day. So, let's talk about stage 6, where things start to get shaky. This is the point where confidence in the dollar really starts to crack, and other countries begin looking for alternatives. It's not a full-blown collapse yet, but it's the moment when the world starts questioning whether the dollar is still the best option. Right now, we're seeing some signs that might fit this stage. Take China and Russia, for example. They've been pushing for years to reduce their reliance on the dollar, especially in trade. They're settling more deals in their own currencies, like the yuan and the ruble. Even countries in the Middle East, which have long tied their oil sales to the dollar, are starting to explore other options. Saudi Arabia, for instance, has hinted at being open to trading oil in currencies other than the dollar. Then there's the rise of digital currencies. Central banks around the world are developing their own digital currencies, which could eventually challenge the dollar's dominance in global transactions. And let's not forget the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They've been talking about creating their own payment systems to bypass the dollar altogether. It's not just about trade either. Countries are also diversifying their reserves, holding less in dollars and more in gold or other assets. When big players start moving away from the dollar, even slowly, it sends a signal. And that signal? Confidence isn't what it used to be. This stage is all about the cracks showing. The dollar's still the top dog, but the leash is getting looser. And if enough countries start pulling in different directions, well, that's when things could really start to shift. So, let's talk about stage 7, where things get really interesting. This is the point where the old ways of trading start to crack, and new ideas rush in to fill the gaps. Suddenly, it's not just about the dollar or the euro anymore. People are looking for alternatives, and that's when you see competing currencies pop up everywhere. Take Bitcoin, for example. It's been around for a while, but now it's not just a fringe idea, it's a real player. Businesses are accepting it, governments are scrambling to regulate it, and everyday folks are using it to buy everything from coffee to cars. Then there's Ethereum, not just a currency, but a whole platform for building new financial tools. And let's not forget stablecoins like Tether or USD Coin, which try to keep things steady by pegging themselves to traditional money. But it's not just digital currencies making waves. Some countries are pushing their own alternatives, like China's digital yuan, designed to work alongside or maybe even replace cash. Even gold and silver are getting a second look as people want something tangible in an uncertain world. Trade shifts too. Barter systems pop up in local communities, and businesses start cutting out the middleman, dealing directly with each other using whatever currency makes sense at the time. It's messy, it's chaotic, but it's also a sign of something bigger, a world where money isn't just one thing anymore. It's whatever people decide has value. The British pound was once the king of global trade, backed by gold and trusted by nations. But after World War II, the weight of debt and the rise of the US dollar chipped away at its dominance. By the 1970s, the pound had lost its crown, replaced by the dollar as the world's reserve currency. It wasn't a sudden crash, but a slow, painful decline. Years of inflation, devaluation, and shifting power. Then there's the French franc. For centuries, it was a symbol of European stability. But by the late 20th century, economic turmoil and the push for a united Europe made it obsolete. In 2002, it vanished entirely, swallowed by the euro. No more francs, just a new currency taking its place overnight. And who can forget the Soviet ruble? Once the backbone of an empire, it collapsed with the USSR itself. Hyperinflation turned savings into worthless paper, and by the 1990s, the ruble was a shadow of itself. The Russian Federation tried to rebuild it, but trust was broken. New currencies emerged in the former Soviet states, each trying to fill the void. Every time, the pattern's the same. A currency that once ruled the world weakens, trust erodes, and something new steps in. Sometimes it's gradual, sometimes it's sudden, but the end is always the same. The old guard falls, and the new one takes its place. You know, economic shifts can feel overwhelming, but there are simple steps you can take to protect your financial future. First, build an emergency fund. Aim for 3 to 6 months' worth of living expenses. It's your safety net when things get rocky. Next, diversify your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Spread them across stocks, bonds, and even real estate if you can. It helps cushion the blow if one area takes a hit. Also, keep an eye on your debt. High-interest debt like credit cards can drag you down fast. Pay it off as quickly as possible. And don't forget to keep learning. The more you understand about money, the better decisions you'll make. Finally, stay flexible. The economy changes, and so should your plan. Review your finances regularly and adjust as needed. Small steps today can make a big difference tomorrow.